Third point, though, and this one's one that's often overlooked. I think most people are aware of the first two, but the third point is this, is that the Beatitudes are not just like moral dictums, they are paradoxes. The Catechism calls them paradoxical promises that are meant to sustain our hope in the midst of tribulation. Now, how are they paradoxes? Well, if you look at them, some of them are rather strange, right? When Jesus talks about being happy, we don't usually associate happiness with, for example, poverty, all right? Happy are those who are poor. Well, no, most of us would think that if someone's poor, whether materially or spiritually, they should be unhappy, right? Or when he says, happy are those who mourn. Well, I don't know about you. That doesn't make any sense at all. Have you ever mourned for someone? Have you ever lost someone close to you? That's the precise opposite of happiness. What is Jesus talking about? You can imagine the first disciples hearing these paradoxes kind of scratching their head. What is he talking about? Happy are they who mourn. How about unhappy are they who mourn? Right? That's a weird thing to say. What about happy are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness? Well, if you're starving for righteousness, if you're thirsting for it, that means you don't have it. Or it means that you don't, if you're starving or thirsting for justice in the world, why would you be starving for it? Well, it's because there isn't any justice, because there's injustice everywhere. And usually we would say, well, if you're starving for justice, you're probably unhappy, right? Because you haven't found it. Same thing, you can go through each one of these. Happy are the merciful. Well, have you ever shown mercy to someone? A lot of times what happens to people who are merciful is that they often get stabbed in the back because the person who they forgave, who didn't deserve it, goes on and hurts them again, and then again, and then again. And yet Jesus is saying that if you have mercy, you'll find the secret of happiness. That doesn't make sense at first glance, right? Same thing about being pure in heart. If you've ever tried to do the right thing, right, and act with integrity, when others aren't doing the wrong thing, what often happens? You get mocked, you get reviled, you get isolated, right? So the pure in heart, the innocent of this world, often get trampled on, joked about, insulted, accused of really being sinful, but not, just pretending to be righteous, holier than thou, that kind of thing. So is purity of heart, or think about children here, who are naturally pure of heart. What happens to so many children? Their innocence, the world tries to rob them of it, right? Wants to see them defiled and to see their innocence taken from them, right? So pure of heart, are they happy? In this world, they often get trampled upon. Also peacemakers too. Think about Martin Luther King Jr. or other people who are trying to bring reconciliation between warring factions. They are often turned on. They're often persecuted themselves and sometimes even killed for the sake of their pursuit of peace, right? And lastly, it doesn't take any thought really here to realize that the first person who would have heard the eighth beatitude, blessed are you, happy are you when people persecute you, would have said, are you crazy? No, to be persecuted is the worst thing you can experience. So think about if you've ever been slandered, for example, or falsely accused. That really hurts. It penetrates and pierces you in the soul. It's a deep, deep, deep wound to be betrayed by someone or falsely accused. And yet Jesus of Nazareth gets up on a mountain and says, oh, if someone slanders you, be happy. If someone falsely accuses you, rejoice. And this doesn't make any sense. It's a paradox here. So how do we explain these paradoxical promises? Well, one of the things I try to do when I'm teaching about the Beatitudes is to show my students, again, if you go back to the first century context for just a minute, a first century Jew would have recognized that when Jesus gets up and he starts giving this list of blessings, that's also what Moses did in the Old Testament. If you go back to the book of Deuteronomy 28, Moses gives a long list of blessings. He says, if you obey the commandments of God, you're going to have all these material blessings. You're going to have fertility. You're going to have good flocks. You're going to have an abundance of food. You're going to be wealthy, so wealthy that you can lend. All the other peoples, they're going to borrow from you because you're going to be blessed with this material goods. But if you disobey, you're going to be cursed, right? Meaning you'll be punished. So there'll be those who disobey the law, they're going to have infertility. They're going to have famine. Their flocks aren't going to be reproduced. They're going to end up in poverty, and eventually they're going to be cast out into exile. So instead of being those who lend to the Gentiles, you're going to be the slaves of the Gentiles, right? So Moses' old law had blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. And yet Jesus gets up and he gives the new law. And what's interesting, what would have stood out for first century Jew is there's no curses. It's just a list of blessings, right? And so something appears to be missing until you look at the blessings and you realize some of these blessings don't sound all that great. You know, the blessing of being poor or mourning or being persecuted, right? Or hungering and thirsting for justice. With blessings like that, you know, who needs curses, right? You might be the response you would have. But what you got to realize here is that, in a sense, what Jesus is doing at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount is he's showing us that in the new law, in the new covenant, the blessings and the curses, in a sense, put the curses in quotes here, are the same. In other words, they've been fused into one. You could put it this way, at the risk of sounding shocking. In the new law, the curses are the blessings. Because the way we enter into the blessing of the kingdom of heaven is through the cross. It's through suffering. It's through the mystery of a suffering that's united to the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In fact, St. Paul says this in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13. It's a really important verse here. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us, so that in Christ Jesus the blessing of Abraham might come upon us, might come upon the Gentiles. So what happens is Jesus transforms the curses into blessings through his passion, death, and resurrection. And that's really what he's giving us at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. What he's showing us is that the secret to true happiness is to live in accord with these Beatitudes. Because we will only ever find happiness when we take up the cross of humility and gentleness and persecution and meekness and seeking after peace and seeking after hungering and thirsting for righteousness. When we take up that cross and follow him through the cross all the way to the resurrection, then we'll find the secret of happiness. And then we will inherit the kingdom of heaven.
What does it mean for something to be blessed? Here's my attempt at an answer. When something is blessed, it's made holy. When something is blessed, it is made holy. Now, what is it to be made holy? Okay. Well, in ancient Israel, in the Old Testament, to be holy, here's God's people, the people of Israel, the chosen people of God, were called to be holy. And that was often interpreted in many, many ways. It's a really complex term, right? But it's often interpreted in the sense of that, okay, you're my people, therefore you're holy, meaning you're set apart. That you're not like everyone else. You're holy, like I'm holy. God is completely other. And so he's calling his people to be other, to live differently, to be a light in a dark world. So to be holy is not to be perfect. That's really, really important. We need to understand right away. Because if you're called to be holy and I'm called to be holy, that doesn't mean we're called to be perfect. Jesus says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Yes, that's a whole nother thing. Make it another video about that. To be holy is not to have flaws. That's why the saints, sometimes people will find out bad things about saints, like, wow, this saint said this thing that was like really makes me feel uncomfortable. Or this saint seemed that they didn't have all their act together. Or this other saint seemed that they were kind of like a bear to be around. Like, to work for them was kind of a grind, that they weren't perfect. Yeah, because that's not what it is to be holy. It's not to be perfect. It's to be, so blessed is to be holy, to be set apart. Now, here's the interesting thing. Why did the people of Israel need to be set apart? Because the people of Israel are just like us. What do I mean by that? Because the people of Israel, when they would live among other people, they wanted to be just like everyone else. They wanted to fit in. They wanted to blend in. And that's the truth for us, right? We want to look like everyone else. We just want to be like everyone else. We want to live like everyone else. We don't want to live set apart. We don't want to live differently. We just kind of want to, again, fit in. This is the reality, from middle school to the end of our lives, is we just want to get along. We want to fit in. We don't want to be weird. We don't want to be different. And yet, here's God who says, no, be mine. Not be weird, but be mine, which means be set apart. Here's the interesting thing. To be blessed is for a thing to be made holy, which means for it to be set apart, but not like set apart like in the sense of removed from use. Like, so here's this blessed vessel, like at Mass, right? They have the chalice. That doesn't mean removed from use. It means set apart for a purpose, like elevated to a higher use. So here's it's back to like if you've ever asked a priest to bless your crucifix. You go to the store and you buy a crucifix, buy it on a chain. It's jewelry. Nice, it's nice and it's beautiful maybe. When it gets blessed, it ceases to be jewelry. Why? Because it is now blessed as holy. It's set apart for a purpose. It's now set apart and elevated to a higher purpose. The purpose of that crucifix on the chain is no longer to merely be an accessory to your wardrobe. It is always meant to simply from then on point to Jesus and his unstoppable love for whoever looks upon this cross, right? So it's no longer jewelry. Why? Because it's been blessed, it's been consecrated, it's been elevated, set apart for a higher purpose. So if you ever have anything blessed, it's no longer just that thing. It's no longer what it was you bought it for in the first place. So it's why it's set apart. Now here's an interesting thing. I love the Feast of St. Blaise, Bishop and Martyr, because the feast day of St. Blaise, people come forward and they get their throats blessed. And there's this prayer, and you know, there's candlesticks. It's a whole Catholic thing. Anyways, they get their throats blessed, and through the intercession of St. Blaise, Bishop and Martyr, may you be preserved from all illnesses of the throat, ear, nose, throat, something like this. I usually have the book in front of me. But people get their throats blessed to help them not get sick. Great. But when something is blessed, what happens? It's made holy. It's been set apart. It's been elevated for a higher purpose. And it's always a great reminder of, oh my gosh, my throat has been blessed, which means I can only use it for things that give God glory and help people. Like I can only use my throat for something that will lift people up and give God praise if I use my throat for something other than that, for gossip, for complaining, for grumbling. If I use my throat for curse words, if I use my voice, that now has been blessed now for something less, then I'm not using it for the purpose for which it has been set apart. Last thing, super cool. If you're a baptized Christian, that means your whole self has been blessed. If you've been baptized, that means that here's a baby, unborn or unbaptized baby or unbaptized adult, made in God's image and likeness, beloved to the Lord, obviously. But if they've been baptized, they've been what? They've been blessed. They've been made holy. They've been set apart, elevated to a higher purpose. They've been consecrated to Jesus, which means every element of our lives as baptized Christians should be to point to the Father and give him glory, to help our brothers and sisters in their daily lives, in their struggles, in their joys, to be able to share, to be able to walk through this life as someone who has been set apart. Again, what's the temptation for us? It's gonna be just like Israel. But I don't wanna be set apart. Father Mike, why do you make me do this? I wanna look like everyone else. I wanna live like everyone else. I wanna just be like everyone else. But listen, you're not like everyone else. You're his. So you gotta live like his. You're not an average human being. You've been baptized. You've been blessed. You've been made holy. You've been consecrated. You've been set apart and elevated to a higher purpose. Now we can either choose to live off that purpose, or we can live on purpose. And I believe that with God's grace, you can do that today, starting today. How can today you live as someone who has been blessed, is made holy, has been elevated to a higher purpose for the praise of his glory? Man, how awesome is that? So, you've been blessed. Be blessed. And I'll say to you, for all of us here at Ascension Presents, my name is Father Mike. God bless. Right? It all comes together. Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. So there's this scripture passage that I wonder if it didn't make any sense for most Christians for like a really long time. I think for the first Christians, it made complete sense. And then for maybe a long time, it didn't make as much sense, at least until relatively recent history. And it comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 10, beginning with verse 34. It's Jesus speaking, and Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace upon the earth. I have come not to bring not peace, but the sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's enemies will be those of his own household. And I've been thinking about this because I wonder if for years in Christianity, in Christendom, that wasn't really a thing. I wonder if they heard it, if you would hear this gospel preached or proclaimed on Sunday Mass and be like, oh yeah, I guess. Not really. I mean, we're all Catholic. Because I think that for a long time, there could be cultural Catholicism, right? Or even cultural Christianity, where those who are inside the faith, those who are in the church, and those who are outside the church are we're all looking more or less the same. At least, when it comes to Christendom, when it comes to the fact that Christianity had positively influenced so many areas of culture that it was like, yeah, that's a good thing. So, for example, that marriage is for life, and between one man and one woman, that our culture had been shaped by that, and so inside the church, outside the church, kind of looks the same, right? Because the culture is supporting what the church would be proposing. When it comes to all human beings having dignity from conception to death, to natural death. That sense, like the culture around Christianity had been so shaped by Christianity that the culture then became the support of the church inside. But I think we've entered into a new era. And it's been coming for a long time, obviously. But this new era is one where we know what Jesus meant when he said, I have not come to bring peace but the sword, meaning Jesus is the cause of division. That there will be father against son and daughter against mother and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law, and that one's enemies will be from their own household. Because I imagine this is what you've found probably in your life, that ever since Christianity, ever since being a Catholic, ceased being a cultural thing. I mean, it was never meant to be a cultural thing, right? We're always meant to have to actively choose and place our faith in Jesus, not just something like, I'm Catholic, just like I'm Irish or whatever. But like, no, I chose Christ at some point. Once that became very clear, and now we have, with the rise of those who are irreligious or those who are they don't have any religious affiliation, what we realize more and more and more is that you and I have to make the decision to be disciples of Jesus. It's not something we're born into. It's not something we're just that's how I was raised, and that's what I do. It's I have to choose him because the culture around me is not choosing him. I have to choose him because the culture around me is not the same as the culture of those who follow Christ. And we live in a world right now where those divisions, that division between the church and the world, is in some areas almost unmistakable, right? And so you have families. That's not just, my child no longer practices the faith, or my mom doesn't really believe. She goes to Sunday Mass or whatever, but we're not really united. Where there's these cultural issues right now surrounding us. Is marriage between one man and one woman? Is marriage for life? Does life begin at conception? And does it have inviolable worth all the way up until natural death? Well, our culture around us is saying that if you think that marriage is between one man and one woman, then you're ignorant or you hate. If you think that a marriage is for life, then you're naive or worse. If you think that life begins at conception and has an inviolable dignity until natural death, then you don't care about people who might be stuck in a situation like this, and you're the problem. And then you have this division, not only from culture around us and the people in the church, but you have this division in families. You have this division amongst those who would otherwise be great friends, but these points of division become points where it's like, what do we do here? And Jesus, true to his word in Matthew's gospel, is a cause of division. Because to choose him means I have to live differently. And that may even mean I have to live differently than my parents. I have to live differently and choose and believe things that are different than my siblings. And actually our family now, we find our family is actually divided. And so Thanksgiving is awful, and other, like 4th of July or even just other family get-togethers can be really painful. Because why? Because of Jesus. But he said he would be the cause of division, so it should be a surprise to us. The surprise is we didn't have to always do this, but we do have to do it now. So what do we do in this situation? What do we do in this cultural context? Well, I think there's at least three things. And the first thing is we recognize that I have to acknowledge and accept the painful reality that we are divided. I have to acknowledge and accept the painful reality that, no, this is how it is. I don't want it to be this way. I would like for all families who are following Christ, all families who even profess faith, or even all families who don't profess faith, to be united. But I have to, in this context, acknowledge and accept the fact, the painful reality that we're divided. Number two, I have to know what I can do and what I can't do. I have to know where we are united, and I have to acknowledge where we're divided. I mean, this is just being smart, and this is just being honest to what we believe. Okay, what can I do? Well, I can continue to love people who disagree with me. I can continue to encourage and pray for and live and share life with people who disagree with me. I can even, we're actually called to love people who consider us the enemy of people around us, or the people that we truly love. What can I do? I can continue to love. I can continue to support. I continue to share life. I can do that. But what can't I do? I have to acknowledge the places where we're divided. And while I can love someone who experiences same-sex attraction, and even love people who enter into same-sex marriage, I can't endorse it or celebrate it. So I have to know what I can do, and I have to know what I can't do. The third thing is I have to love and be absolutely committed to rejecting bitterness. Because this is the thing, is once we experience division, yep, we have this, I acknowledge the painful reality about this, and I know what I can and can't do, but the temptation then is like, okay, this is my camp, and that's your camp, and now I have a bitterness against anyone who's in another camp. Because they're trying to do this against us, or going to do this against me, and the reality is we'll all be tempted to become bitter. We'll all be tempted to say, well, that means that they're the problem, and they're not the problem. Other people are other people. Other people are made in God's image and likeness, which means other people are meant to be loved as Jesus has loved you and Jesus has loved me, like with everything we've got. And if I'm going to love them, it means I cannot afford to become bitter. I cannot afford to become bitter. Christ prohibits you and he prohibits me from becoming bitter towards anyone from whom we've been divided. Why? Because that's how he loves. Loves without bitterness, even those who would hurt him directly. And that's a higher call than probably many of us have ever experienced. So in the midst of a world that's divided, in the midst of families that are divided, in the midst of the brothers and sisters who are divided, what do? We acknowledge that division, painful as it is. We recognize and are smart about what we can do and what we can't do. And we reject all bitterness and choose to find ways to love someone, so that if ever they were to come back to us and say, hey, I need an open door, that they will not find bitterness in your heart or in my heart, but they'll find an open door and they'll find the face of Jesus. Even amongst those people who they might consider an enemy. If you're considered someone's enemy, can you still be the face of Jesus for them? I believe you can, and Jesus has told us that we have to be. So, in a world that's broken, with our broken hearts, we ask for the Lord's grace to heal us, to accept and acknowledge the painful reality, to know what we can and can't do, but to reject bitterness so we can love. That's our call. That's our commission. From all of us here to Presents, my name is Father Mike. God bless.